I never thought I'd be the one to say my husband is cheating on me. But here I am, sitting in a car outside a hotel, watching the man I love walk in with another woman. How did we get here? Just a few months ago, we were happy, or so I thought. Now, I'm questioning everything. The late nights at work, the sudden interest in fitness, the secretive text messages. Was our entire marriage built on lies? As I struggle with betrayal and heartbreak, I'm faced with impossible choices. Do I confront him, try to save our marriage, or do I walk away from the life we've built together? One thing's for sure, nothing will ever be the same again. But in the midst of this chaos, I'm discovering a strength I never knew I had. Will it be enough to help me navigate this storm and come out stronger on the other side? I never thought my life would take such a drastic turn. I mean, who does? One day you're living your everyday routine, and the next, everything you believed in crumbles around you. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning. My name's Sarah, and I'm a nurse at the local hospital. I've been married to Mark for 10 years now. We have two amazing kids, Emily and Ethan, who are 8 and 6. Our life seemed, well, perfect. At least that's what I thought. I remember the day it all began like it was yesterday. I was rushing around the house, trying to get the kids ready for school while simultaneously packing lunches and ironing Mark's shirt for work. It was chaos, as usual, but I loved it. That's just who I am, always taking care of everyone. "Mom, I can't find my science project," Emily yelled from upstairs. I sighed, putting down the iron. "Coming, sweetie." As I helped Emily locate her project, it was under her bed, of course, I heard Ethan start crying downstairs. Great, another fire to put out. I rushed down to find him standing in front of the open fridge, milk spilled all over the floor. I just wanted cereal. He sniffled. "It's okay, buddy," I said, grabbing a towel. "Accidents happen. Let's clean this up together, all right?" By the time I got the kids fed, dressed, and out the door, I was already exhausted. But there was Mark, looking handsome in his suit, giving me that smile that always made my heart skip a beat. "You're amazing. You know that," he said, kissing me on the cheek. "I don't know how you do it all," I beamed at him. "It's not easy, but it's worth it. You guys are worth it." He grabbed his briefcase and headed for the door. "Don't forget, we've got dinner with the Johnsons tonight." "Oh, right, the dinner. I'd completely forgotten." "No problem," I lied smoothly. "I'll pick up something nice to wear on my lunch break." As soon as he left, I slumped against the kitchen counter. How was I going to fit in shopping with my already packed schedule? But that's just what you do when you're a wife and mother, right? You make it work. At the hospital, it was nonstop as usual. I rushed from patient to patient, checking vitals, administering medications, and trying to offer a comforting word or smile where I could. It's not an easy job, but I love it. There's something about being able to help people when they're at their most vulnerable that just feels right. During my break, I managed to scarf down a sandwich while online shopping for a dress. Thank goodness for next day delivery. Crisis averted. When I finally got home, the house was quiet. Too quiet. I found Mark in the living room, looking stressed. "Everything okay?" I asked, setting down my bags. He ran a hand through his hair. "In the Johnsons canceled? Tom's got food poisoning or something?" I tried to hide my relief. "Oh no, that's terrible. I hope he feels better soon." Inside, I was doing a little happy dance. An unexpected night off? Yes, please. Mark looked at me apologetically. "I'm sorry you went through all that trouble to get a new dress." I waved him off. "Don't worry about it. Hey, why don't we have a family night instead? We could order pizza, play some board games with the kids." His face lit up. "That sounds perfect." And it was perfect. We laughed, we played, we ate way too much pizza. As I watched Mark goofing around with the kids, I felt this wave of love and contentment wash over me. This was my life, and it was good. Little did I know, it was the calm before the storm. If I'd known what was coming, maybe I would have held on to that moment a little tighter. But isn't that always the way? You never know when everything's about to change. As I tucked the kids into bed that night, I couldn't shake this feeling that something was off. But I pushed it aside. After all, what did I have to worry about? I had a loving husband, great kids, a job I loved. Life was good. Or so I thought. The first time I noticed something was off, I brushed it aside. I mean, people change, right? Especially after 10 years of marriage. But looking back, I should have trusted my gut. It started on a Tuesday. I remember because I just finished a grueling night shift at the hospital. All I wanted was to crawl into bed. But I had promised to make pancakes for the kids. As I stumbled into the kitchen, bleary-eyed and exhausted, I nearly collided with Mark. "Whoa there, sleepyhead," he chuckled, steadying me. That's when I noticed it. He was different. "Are you wearing cologne?" I asked, sniffing the air. It was musky and unfamiliar. He shrugged, avoiding my eyes. "Thought I'd try something new. You like it?" I nodded, too tired to think much of it. But as I watched him rush out the door, I couldn't shake this nagging feeling in my gut. Over the next few weeks, little things kept catching my attention. Mark, who had never set foot in a gym before, suddenly became obsessed with working out. He started coming home later, always with the excuse of hitting the gym after work. One night, as we were getting ready for bed, I couldn't help but comment, "You're really committed to this fitness thing, huh?" He flexed his bicep jokingly. "Gotta keep up with you, don't I? You're married to a stud, after all." I laughed, but it felt forced. Something in his tone didn't sit right with me. The final straw came when I was doing laundry one Saturday. As I sorted through Mark's gym clothes, a receipt fluttered to the floor. Curious, I picked it up. It was for a pair of ridiculously expensive running shoes. "Mark?" I called out, holding up the receipt. "When did you buy these?" He appeared in the doorway, looking flustered. "Oh, those? Just picked them up last week. Got a good deal." I raised an eyebrow. $200 is a good deal?" He snatched the receipt from my hand, crumpling it up. "It's an investment in my health, Sarah. What's the big deal?" I held up my hands in surrender. "No deal, just surprised, that's all." That night, as Mark snored beside me, I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing. Since when did Mark care so much about his appearance? And why was he getting so defensive? The next morning, I decided to swing by his office with lunch, something I hadn't done in ages. As I walked through the parking lot, I spotted his car. And there, hanging from the rearview mirror, was a small bottle of that new cologne. My heart sank. Mark had always been adamant about not having any scents in the car. Said they gave him a headache. So why was it there now? I turned around and went back home, the uneaten lunches weighing heavily in my hands. That evening, when Mark came home, I watched him closely. The way he checked his phone more frequently, the extra care he took with his appearance, the vague answers about his day. "How was work?" I asked casually over dinner. He shrugged, not meeting my eyes. Same old, how about you?" I hesitated, then decided to push a little. "I thought about bringing you lunch today, but got caught up with the kids." For a split second, I saw panic flash across his face before he composed himself. "That's okay, honey. I was in meetings most of the day anyway." Lies, all lies. That night, as I lay awake listening to Mark's steady breathing, I felt like I was drowning. How had we gotten here? When did secrets start building walls between us? Part of me wanted to shake him awake, to demand answers. But another part, a scared part, didn't want to know the truth. Because deep down, I think I already knew. Something was very, very wrong in our marriage. As I finally drifted off to sleep, I made a decision. I wasn't going to be the clueless wife anymore. If Mark was hiding something, I was going to find out what it was, no matter how much it might hurt. Little did I know, the pain was only just beginning. The next few weeks were like living in a fog. I kept telling myself I was being paranoid, that Mark would never cheat on me. But the signs just kept piling up, and I couldn't ignore them anymore. It was a Tuesday night when things really started to unravel. I was folding laundry in our bedroom when Mark's phone buzzed on the nightstand. I glanced over, not meaning to snoop, but the name on the screen caught my eye. Jen PT. My heart skipped a beat. Jen. Who was Jen? Before I could stop myself, I picked up the phone. The message preview read, "Great session today. Same time tomorrow?" I felt sick to my stomach. I knew I shouldn't, but I opened the message thread. It was full of conversations about meeting times, compliments on form, and flirty emojis from both of them. I heard the front door open and quickly put the phone back. Mark walked in, all smiles and sweat. "Hey, honey," he said, giving me a quick peck on the cheek. "How was your day?" I forced a smile. "Fine. How was your workout?" He launched into a detailed description of his routine, but I wasn't really listening. All I could think about was Jen. Who was she? Was she really just his personal trainer? And then Jen showed me this new technique for... "Jen?" I interrupted, trying to keep my voice casual. "Your trainer?" He nodded, not meeting my eyes. "Yeah, I mentioned her before, right?" No, he hadn't. That night, I lay awake, my mind racing. I wanted to believe Mark. I wanted to trust him, but something just felt off. The next morning, I decided to do something I'd never done before. I was going to check up on him. I called in sick to work and waited until Mark left for the day. Then, I drove to his gym. My palms were sweaty on the steering wheel as I parked across the street, watching the entrance. An hour passed, then two. No sign of Mark. Just as I was about to give up, I saw him. But he wasn't in gym clothes. He was in a suit, looking sharp, walking out of a nearby coffee shop. And he wasn't alone. A tall, blonde woman walked beside him, laughing at something he said. They looked comfortable together. Too comfortable. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I watched as they hugged goodbye, holding on just a little too long. Then Mark checked his watch and hurried off, probably back to work. I sat in my car, tears streaming down my face. How could he do this to me? To our family? Explain who Jen is. He stumbled over his words, trying to come up with an excuse, but I'd heard enough. "I saw you," I said quietly. "With her, at the coffee shop." He fell silent, staring at the floor. "Is she your trainer, Mark? Or is she something else?" He looked up at me, his eyes pleading. "Sarah, it's not what you think. Jen's just a friend, a colleague. We were just having coffee." I wanted to believe him. God, how I wanted to believe him. But the image of them together, laughing, touching, kept flashing in my mind. "Do you usually dress up in a suit to meet your trainer?" I asked bitterly. He flinched. We're not. Just tell me the truth, Mark. Please." He took a deep breath. "Nothing's happened, Sarah. I swear. We're just friends." But I could see it in his eyes. Maybe nothing had happened yet, but he wanted it to. And that was almost worse. I turned away, unable to look at him anymore. "I think you should sleep on the couch tonight." As I lay in our bed that night, alone, I felt like my whole world was crumbling around me. How had we gotten here? When did I stop being enough for him? I didn't sleep at all. Instead, I stared at the ceiling, wondering what I was going to do next. Because one thing was clear. Things couldn't go on like this. Something had to change. And I had a sinking feeling that our marriage would never be the same again. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. My eyes were puffy from crying, and my head was pounding. But I knew I couldn't just lie in bed all day. I had kids to take care of, a job to do, and a husband to... Well, I wasn't sure what to do about Mark yet. As I stumbled into the kitchen, I found Mark already there, looking like he hadn't slept either. He was nursing a cup of coffee and staring blankly at the wall. "Morning," I mumbled, avoiding his eyes. He cleared his throat. "Sarah, can we talk?" I sighed, pouring myself a cup of coffee. "About what, Mark? About how you lied to me." About this Jen person. He flinched at her name. I told you, it's not what you think. We're just friends. I slammed my mug down, coffee sloshing over the sides. Friends don't lie to their wives about meeting up. Arkahi opened his mouth to respond, but I cut him off. You know what? I don't want to hear it right now. I have to get the kids ready for school. As I herded Emily and Ethan out the door, I could feel Mark's eyes on me, but I couldn't deal with him right now. I needed to think. At work, I couldn't concentrate. My mind kept replaying everything. The cologne, the expensive gym clothes, the secretive text messages. It all pointed to one thing. But I still couldn't bring myself to believe it. During my lunch break, I found myself Googling, signs your husband is cheating. As I scrolled through the list, my heart sank. Mark ticked almost every box. That's when I knew I had to do something. I couldn't just sit back and watch my marriage fall apart. I needed proof, one way or another. After my shift, instead of heading home, I drove to a small office building across town. The sign on the door read, Smith Investigations. My hands were shaking as I knocked. A gruff voice called out, Come in. Inside, I found a middle-aged man with a receding hairline and a kind face. He introduced himself as Dave. What can I do for you, Mrs. Thompson? I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Sarah Thompson. And I think my husband might be cheating on me. Dave's expression softened. He'd clearly heard this many times before. Why don't you sit down and tell me what's going on? So I did. I told him everything, the sudden interest in fitness, the late nights, the mysterious texts. By the time I finished, I was in tears again. Dave handed me a tissue. I'm sorry you're going through this, Mrs. Thompson. Unfortunately, it's a story I hear all too often. But don't worry, we'll get to the bottom of this. We spent the next hour going over the details. Dave explained how he'd follow Mark and house, take photos, and gather evidence. It felt surreal, like I was in some kind of bad movie. Are you sure you want to do this? Dave asked gently. Sometimes, knowing the truth can be more painful than not knowing. I took a deep breath. I need to know, for my own sanity, for my kids. I need to know the truth. As I left Dave's office, I felt a strange mix of relief and dread. On one hand, I was finally doing something about my suspicions. On the other, I was terrified of what Dave might find. That night, as I lay in bed, alone again, I couldn't bear to sleep next to Mark. I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd done. Was I overreacting? Should I have just trusted Mark? But then I remembered the look on his face when I confronted him about the coffee shop. The panic in his eyes. The way he couldn't quite meet my gaze when he said Jen was just a friend. No, I wasn't overreacting. I was fighting for my marriage, for my family. And if Mark was innocent, well, then I'd apologize and we'd work on rebuilding the trust between us. But if he wasn't, if Dave found proof of an affair, I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block out the thought. I couldn't think about that right now. I just had to take it one day at a time. As I drifted off to sleep, I made a promise to myself. No matter what happened, no matter what Dave found, I would be strong. For myself, for my kids. I wouldn't let this break me. Little did I know, my strength was about to be tested in ways I never could have imagined. The next few days were a blur of anxiety and second-guessing. Every time my phone buzzed, I jumped, thinking it might be Dave with news, but it never was. Meanwhile, things at home were tense, to say the least. Mark kept trying to talk to me, to explain, but I couldn't bear to hear his excuses, not until I knew the truth. So we danced around each other, exchanging only the bare minimum of words necessary to keep our household running. One morning, as I was getting ready for work, Mark cornered me in the bathroom. Sarah, please, he said, his voice desperate. We can't go on like this. Can we just talk? I looked at him in the mirror, saw the bags under his eyes that matched my own. For a moment, I almost gave in. But then I remembered the blonde woman, the secretive texts, and my resolve hardened. There's nothing to talk about, Mark, I said coldly. Not until you're ready to tell me the truth." He flinched as if I'd slapped him. "I told you, there's nothing going on with Jen. We're just friends," I finished for him. "Right. You keep saying that, but friends don't lie to their wives, Mark." I pushed past him, my heart pounding. As I grabbed my keys and headed for the door, I heard him call out, "I love you, Sarah." I paused, my hand on the doorknob. Part of me wanted to turn around, to run into his arms and forget all of this. But I couldn't, not yet. "I'll be late tonight," I said, not looking back. "Don't wait up." At work, I was a mess. I kept making silly mistakes, mixing up patients, charts, forgetting simple procedures. My colleague, Amy, noticed. "Sarah, are you okay?" she asked during our lunch break. "You seem distracted." I forced a smile. "I'm fine. Just tired, I guess." She didn't look convinced, but thankfully she didn't push it. As my shift was ending, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Dave. "Got some preliminary info. Can you meet?" My heart leaped into my throat. This was it. I met Dave in a quiet coffee shop away from the hospital and my neighborhood. As soon as I sat down, he slid a manila envelope across the table. "Before you open that," he said gently, "are you sure you want to know?" I nodded, my hand shaking as I reached for the envelope. Inside were several photos. The first few were innocent enough. Mark leaving work, going to the gym. But then, my breath caught in my throat. There was Mark, sitting at a restaurant with the blonde woman I'd seen before. They were leaning close, laughing, their hands touching on the table. "That's not all," Dave said softly. He pulled out another photo. This one showed Mark and the woman, Jen, I presumed, entering a hotel. I felt like I was going to be sick. "Did they?" Dave shook his head. "They were only in there for about an hour. Could have been a business meeting, could have been something else. I can't say for sure." I stared at the photos, tears blurring my vision. This was my worst fear come to life. "What do I do now?" I whispered. Dave leaned back, his expression sympathetic. "That's up to you, Mrs. Thompson. You could confront him with these, or we could keep digging. Try to get more concrete evidence." I nodded numbly, barely hearing him. All I could think about was Mark, my Mark, with another woman. As I drove home, my mind was racing. Should I confront him? Should I wait for more evidence? What about the kids? What about our life together? I was so lost in thought that I almost missed my turn. As I pulled into our driveway, I saw Mark's car was already there. For a moment, I sat in the car, trying to compose myself. How was I supposed to face him now? Taking a deep breath, I walked into the house. Mark was in the kitchen, cooking dinner. The sight of him, so domestic, so normal, made my heart ache. "Hey," he said cautiously, "I made your favorite, lasagna." The smell of tomato sauce and cheese filled the air, making my stomach turn. How could he act so normal when our whole life was falling apart? "I'm not hungry," I muttered, heading for the stairs. "Sarah." "Wait," Mark called after me. "Please, can we talk?" I paused, my foot on the first step. Part of me wanted to turn around, to show him the photos, to demand answers, but I was exhausted, emotionally and physically. I couldn't face it. Not tonight. "Not now, Mark," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I can't." As I climbed the stairs, I heard him sigh heavily. Once in our bedroom, I locked the door and sank to the floor, the tears finally coming. What was I going to do? How had we ended up here? And most importantly, how was I going to find the strength to face what came next? I spent the next few days in a daze, going through the motions of life but not really living. The photos Dave had given me burned a hole in my purse, but I couldn't bring myself to confront Mark. Not yet. I needed more. More proof, more courage, more something. One morning, as I was getting the kids ready for school, Emily tugged on my sleeve. "Mommy, why are you and Daddy fighting?" My heart sank. Of course they'd noticed. Kids always do. "We're not fighting, sweetie. I lied, forcing a smile. Grown-ups just have disagreements sometimes. She didn't look convinced, but thankfully, the school bus arrived, saving me from more questions. As soon as the kids were gone, I called Dave. I need more, I said without preamble. The photos? They're not enough. I need to know for sure, Dave sighed heavily. Mrs. Thompson, are you sure about this? Sometimes not knowing is... Please, I interrupted, my voice cracking. I need to know the truth. There was a long pause before Dave finally agreed. All right, I'll keep digging, but Sarah, prepare yourself. The truth might be harder than you think. After hanging up, I sat at the kitchen table, my head in my hands. What was I doing? Was I really ready for this? Just then, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Mark. Working late tonight. Don't wait up. My stomach churned. Working late. Right. I knew what that probably meant now. Before I could stop myself, I found myself driving to Mark's office. I parked across the street, feeling like a creep as I watched the entrance. Hours passed. No sign of Mark. Just as I was about to give up, my phone buzzed again. Another text from Dave. Target spotted at Rosewood Hotel. En route now. My heart raced. The Rosewood. That was where Dave had photographed Mark and Jen before. Without thinking, I started the car and headed there. As I pulled into the hotel parking lot, I spotted Dave's nondescript sedan. He was watching the entrance intently. I parked next to him and tapped on his window. His eyes widened in surprise. Mrs. Thompson, what are you doing here? I couldn't just sit at home, I said, climbing into his passenger seat. What's happening? Dave looked uncomfortable. Look, Sarah, maybe you shouldn't... But I wasn't listening, because at that moment I saw them, Mark and Jen, walking arm in arm into the hotel. They looked happy, carefree, like they didn't have a care in the world. Oh God, I whispered, feeling like I might throw up. Dave put a hand on my shoulder. I'm so sorry, Sarah. Do you want me to drive you home? I shook my head, unable to tear my eyes away from the hotel entrance. No, I need to know for sure. We sat there for what felt like hours, but was probably only about 45 minutes. Then, Mark and Jen emerged, looking slightly disheveled. They kissed, a deep, passionate kiss that made my heart shatter before going their separate ways. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. It was real. It was all real. Sarah. Dave's voice seemed to come from far away. Sarah, are you okay? I nodded mechanically, even though I was anything but okay. I need to go home, I managed to croak out. The drive home was a blur. I don't even remember how I got there. But suddenly, I was standing in our bedroom, staring at our wedding photo on the nightstand. We looked so happy, so in love. Where had it all gone wrong? In a fit of rage, I grabbed the photo and hurled it across the room. The glass shattered, much like my heart. I sank to the floor, surrounded by broken glass and broken promises, and let out a gut-wrenching sob. Everything I thought I knew, everything I believed in, was a lie. I don't know how long I sat there, crying until I had no tears left. But eventually, I heard the front door open. Mark was home. Sarah, he called out. Are you here? I took a deep breath, steeling myself. This was it. No more hiding. No more pretending. I'm upstairs, I called back, my voice surprisingly steady. I heard his footsteps on the stairs, then a sharp intake of breath as he saw the state of our room. Sarah, what happened? Are you okay? I looked up at him, saw the concern in his eyes. For a moment, I almost wavered, but then I remembered the kiss I'd witnessed, and my resolve hardened. No, Mark, I said quietly. I'm not okay, and we need to talk. His face paled, and I knew. He knew that I knew. Sarah, I can explain. I held up a hand, cutting him off. Don't. I saw you, Mark, at the Rosewood with her. He stumbled backward as if I'd physically struck him. You followed me? I laughed bitterly. I didn't have to. I hired someone to do it for me. How could you, Mark? How could you do this to us, to our family? And as Mark stammered out excuses and apologies, I realized something. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The beginning of a fight, not for my marriage, but for myself. Because I deserved better than this. And I was going to make damn sure I got it. The next few days were a whirlwind of emotions. Mark begged, pleaded, promised to end things with Jen. But I couldn't hear it. Every word out of his mouth felt like another lie. I need some time, I told him, my voice hollow. I'm taking the kids to my sister's for a few days. He nodded, looking defeated. I understand. I'll be here when you get back. We can talk then. As I packed bags for myself and the kids, my mind was racing. What was I going to do? Could I forgive him? Did I even want to? The drive to my sister Lisa's house was quiet. The kids sensed something was wrong, but they didn't ask. I was grateful for that small mercy. Lisa was waiting on the porch when we pulled up. One look at my face and she knew. "Oh, Sarah," she whispered, pulling me into a hug. That night, after the kids were asleep, I told Lisa everything. The suspicions, the investigator, the hotel. She listened without interrupting, her face growing darker with each detail. "That bastard," she muttered when I finished. "I'll kill him." I managed a weak smile. "Get in line." We stayed up late, talking and crying. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I could breathe. The next morning, as I was helping Lisa with breakfast, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Mark. "I miss you. Please come home so we can talk." I stared at the message, my stomach churning. Part of me wanted to go back, to try and fix things, but a stronger part knew I wasn't ready. "You don't have to decide anything right now," Lisa said, noticing my distress. "Take your time, figure out what you want." What did I want? I honestly didn't know anymore. Days passed. Mark kept texting, calling. I ignored most of it, only responding with brief updates about the kids. Each message felt like reopening a wound. One afternoon, while the kids were playing in Lisa's backyard, I found myself Googling divorce lawyers on my phone. The reality of what I was considering hit me like a ton of bricks. "Mommy!" Emily's voice startled me. She was standing in the doorway, looking worried. "When are we going home?" I forced a smile. "Soon, sweetie. We're just having a little vacation with Aunt Lisa." She frowned. "Is Daddy coming?" My heart ached. How could I explain this to them? "Not this time, honey. It's just us for now." That night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, Mark's betrayal playing on repeat in my mind. Around 3 a.m., I gave up and went downstairs. To my surprise, Lisa was already in the kitchen, nursing a cup of tea. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked. I shook my head, collapsing into a chair. I keep thinking, where did I go wrong? What did I do to make him cheat? Lisa's eyes flashed with anger. "Don't you dare blame yourself, Sarah. This is all on him. He made the choice to betray you." Deep down, I knew she was right, but it was hard not to wonder. We sat in silence for a while, the weight of my situation hanging heavy in the air. Finally, Lisa spoke up. "You know, when Tom and I divorced, I thought my life was over," she said softly. But look at me now. I'm happier than I've ever been." I looked at my sister, really looked at her. She was right. The Lisa sitting before me was a far cry from the broken woman I'd comforted years ago when her own marriage fell apart. "How did you do it?" I asked. "How did you move on?" She reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "One day at a time, sis, and by remembering that I deserved better." As the sun began to rise, casting a soft glow through the kitchen window, I felt something shift inside me, a spark of determination, of anger even. I did deserve better. I deserved someone who wouldn't lie to me, who wouldn't betray our vows, and my kids deserved better too. Right then and there, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let Mark's actions define me. I wasn't going to let his betrayal break me. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone and typed out a message to Mark. "We need to talk. I'm coming home tomorrow." Lisa read the message over my shoulder. "Are you sure?" I nodded, feeling more certain than I had in weeks. "I'm sure. It's time I took control of my life again." As I hit send, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt ready to face it. That afternoon, as I packed our bags to head home, Emily appeared in the doorway. "Are we going to see Daddy?" I paused, choosing my words carefully. "Yes, sweetie, we're going home, but things might be a little different for a while." She nodded solemnly, wise beyond her years. "It's okay, Mommy, as long as we're together." I pulled her into a tight hug, blinking back tears. No matter what happened with Mark, I had these two amazing kids, and for them, I would be strong. As we drove home the next day, my heart raced with each mile. I didn't know what awaited me, what Mark would say or do, but I knew one thing for certain: I was done being a victim. It was time to take back my life. As I pulled into our driveway, my heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. Mark's car was there, waiting. This was it. The moment of truth. I turned to the kids in the back seat. "Why don't you two go play in the backyard for a bit? Mommy and Daddy need to talk." They nodded, sensing the tension in the air. As they scampered off, I took a deep breath and walked into the house. Mark was sitting at the kitchen table, his head in his hands. When he heard me come in, he looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed, like he hadn't slept in days. "Sarah," he said, his voice cracking, "you're home." I set my bags down, steeling myself. "We need to talk, Mark. No more lies, no more excuses. I want the truth, all of it." He nodded, gesturing for me to sit. I remained standing, arms crossed. "I'm listening," I said. Mark took a shaky breath. "It started about 6 months ago. Jen, she's a new client at work. We started talking, and I don't know, Sarah, it just happened." "Things don't just happen, Mark," I snapped. "You made a choice. Multiple choices. Every time you lied to me, every time you met her, you chose her over me, over our family." He flinched at my words. I know, and I'm so sorry. It was a mistake, Sarah. A horrible, unforgivable mistake." I laughed bitterly. "You're right about one thing. It is unforgivable." "Please," he begged, reaching for my hand. I pulled away. "Please, Sarah. I'll do anything. I'll quit my job. I'll go to counseling, whatever it takes. I love you." "Love me," I spat. "If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this. You wouldn't have lied to my face for months." Tears were streaming down his face now. "I do love you, Sarah. I never stopped loving you. I got caught up in the excitement, the novelty, but it didn't mean anything, I swear." "It meant something to me, Mark," I shouted, finally losing my cool. "It meant our entire marriage was a lie. It meant that every time you said you were working late or at the gym, you were with her. How am I supposed to trust anything you say now?" He stood up, reaching for me again. "Sarah, please, we can fix this. We can work through this. For the kids, for us." I stepped back, shaking my head. "No, Mark, we can't. You broke us. You broke everything." "What are you saying?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "I'm saying it's over, Mark. I want a divorce." The word hung in the air between us, heavy and final. Mark looked like I'd just punched him in the gut. "No," he said, shaking his head frantically. "No, Sarah, please. We can work this out. I'll do anything. Please don't leave me." For a moment, I almost wavered. The look of utter devastation on his face, the memories of our life together. But then I remembered the photos, the lies, the betrayal. "It's too late," I said quietly. "You already left me, Mark. You left me the moment you decided to be with her." He collapsed back into the chair, sobbing. Part of me wanted to comfort him, but I squashed that impulse. He didn't deserve my comfort, not anymore. "I'll have my lawyer draw up the papers," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. I think it's best if you stay somewhere else for now, for the kids' sake. He looked up at me, his eyes red and puffy. The kids. God, Sarah, what are we going to tell them? I sighed. We'll tell them the truth, that sometimes even when people love each other, they can't be together anymore, that it's not their fault, and that we both love them very much. Mark nodded numbly. I never wanted this, Sarah. I never wanted to hurt you, or the kids. But you did, I said simply. And now we all have to live with the consequences. As if on cue, we heard the back door open. Emily's voice called out, Mommy? Daddy? Can we come in now? I looked at Mark. Pull yourself together. They don't need to see this. He nodded, wiping his face and taking a few deep breaths. When he looked somewhat composed, I called out, Yes, come on in, sweethearts. Emily and Ethan bounded in, their faces lighting up when they saw Mark. They ran to him, wrapping him in a big hug. The sight made my heart ache. We missed you, Daddy, Ethan said. Mark hugged them tightly, fresh tears in his eyes. I missed you too, buddy, so much. I cleared my throat. Kids, why don't you go unpack your bags? Daddy and I need to talk to you about something important in a little bit. They nodded, sensing the serious tone. As they headed upstairs, Mark looked at me, his eyes pleading one last time. Are you sure about this, Sarah? Are you sure we can't try to work it out? I took a deep breath, steeling my resolve. I'm sure, Mark. It's over. As I watched him slump in defeat, I felt a mix of emotions. Sadness, anger, fear. But underneath it all, there was something else. Something that felt a lot like relief. This wasn't the end I had ever imagined for us. But maybe, just maybe, it could be a new beginning. For me, for the kids, for a life without lies and betrayal. It wouldn't be easy. But as I stood there, watching the man I had loved for so long break down in front of me, I knew one thing for certain. I was strong enough to get through this, and I would come out stronger on the other side. The days after my confrontation with Mark were a blur of tears, legal meetings, and difficult conversations. Telling the kids was the hardest part. Their little faces crumpled in confusion and hurt when we explained that Daddy would be living somewhere else for a while. But why? Emily had asked, her bottom lip trembling. Don't you love each other anymore? Mark and I exchanged a pained look. We do love you both very much, I said carefully. But sometimes, grown-ups have problems that they can't fix, even when they try really hard. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was all I could manage without breaking down completely. As Mark packed his things, I felt like I was watching my life unravel in slow motion. Every shirt he folded, every book he packed, was another reminder of the life we'd built together, the life he'd thrown away. Once he was gone, the house felt eerily quiet, empty. I wandered from room to room, feeling lost in my own home. That first night, I curled up in my bed and cried until I had no tears left. The next morning, I woke up feeling numb. I went through the motions of getting the kids ready for school, making breakfast, packing lunches, but it all felt mechanical, like I was watching someone else do these things. After dropping the kids off, I found myself driving aimlessly around town. I couldn't face going back to that empty house just yet. As I drove past the park where Mark and I used to take the kids on weekends, a wave of anger washed over me. How dare he throw away everything we had built together? How dare he make me question every moment of our marriage? Without really thinking about it, I found myself pulling into the parking lot of a gym. Not Mark's gym, I couldn't bear to go there, but a new one across town. On impulse, I walked in and signed up for a membership. We have a great kickboxing class starting in 10 minutes, the perky receptionist told me. Want to give it a try? I hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Why not? It's not like I had anywhere else to be. An hour later, I stumbled out of the class, drenched in sweat and barely able to lift my arms. But for the first time in weeks, I felt alive. The physical exertion had pushed all thoughts of Mark and our failed marriage out of my head, if only temporarily. As I drove home, I realized something. I needed to focus on myself now. For so long, I'd been Mark's wife, the kids, mom. But who was I? Sarah, as an individual. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into rediscovering who I was. I tried new hobbies, read books I'd always meant to get around to, even signed up for a cooking class. Some days were better than others. There were still moments when the grief and anger would hit me like a tidal wave, leaving me gasping for air. But slowly, day by day, I started to feel more like myself again. The Sarah who existed before Mark, before the kids, before all the hurt and betrayal. One evening, as I was making dinner for the kids, Emily came into the kitchen and wrapped her arms around my waist. "Mommy," she said hesitantly, "are you sad that Daddy doesn't live here anymore?" I paused, considering my answer carefully. "Sometimes I am," I said honestly. "But you know what? I'm also excited about the new adventures we're going to have together, just the three of us." She smiled up at me, her eyes bright. "Me too." That night, as I tucked the kids into bed, I felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in months. We were going to be okay, different but okay. The next day, I had my first meeting with my divorce lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Rachel. As she laid out the process ahead of us, I felt a mix of anxiety and determination. "Now, given the circumstances of your separation," Rachel said, her tone businesslike, "we have a strong case for a favorable settlement. Mr. Thompson's infidelity will work in our favor." I nodded, my throat tight. "I don't want to take him for everything he's got," I said. "I just want what's fair for me and the kids." Rachel smiled approvingly. "That's a healthy attitude, Sarah. We'll make sure you and your children are well taken care of." As I left her office, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. This was really happening. I was really doing this. On my way home, I passed by my old workplace. On a whim, I decided to stop in and say hello to my former colleagues. As I chatted with them, catching up on hospital gossip and sharing sanitized versions of my own life updates, I felt a familiar itch. I missed this. I missed the hustle and bustle of the hospital, the feeling of making a difference in people's lives. Before I left, I found myself in the HR office, picking up an application for reinstatement. The idea of going back to work, of having a purpose outside of my role as a mom, was suddenly incredibly appealing. That night, after the kids were in bed, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the application form. Could I really do this? Go back to work? Be a single mom? Start my life over at 35? As I pondered this, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Lisa. "How are you holding up, sis?" I started to type out my usual, "I'm fine," but then stopped. Instead, I called her. "I'm thinking about going back to work," I blurted out as soon as she answered. There was a pause. Then Lisa's voice came through, warm and supportive. "I think that's a great idea, Sarah. You've always been an amazing nurse." We talked for over an hour, discussing the practicalities, the challenges, the fears. By the time we hung up, I felt excited, nervous, but excited. As I got ready for bed that night, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. For the first time in months, I didn't see a victim, a betrayed wife, a broken woman. I saw Sarah, strong, resilient, ready to take on whatever came next. I still had a long way to go. The divorce proceedings would be tough. Co-parenting with Mark would be a challenge, and balancing work and single motherhood wouldn't be easy. But as I climbed into bed, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I was going to be okay, more than okay. I was going to thrive. The next few months flew by in a whirlwind of change. I went back to work at the hospital, starting with part-time shifts that gradually increased as I found my footing. It was challenging, juggling work and single parenthood, but it was also incredibly rewarding. I'd forgotten how much I loved being a nurse, how fulfilling it was to help people in their most vulnerable moments. The divorce proceedings were moving forward, slower than I'd like, but steady. Mark and I communicated mostly through our lawyers now, which made things easier in some ways and harder in others. The kids were adjusting, though they still had moments of sadness and confusion. We'd started family therapy, which seemed to be helping. One Wednesday afternoon, I was at work when I got an urgent call from Emily's school. She'd gotten into a fight with another student and was in the principal's office. My heart sank as I rushed over, worried sick about what could have happened. When I arrived, I found Emily sitting outside the principal's office, her eyes red from crying. "Oh, sweetie," I said, kneeling down in front of her. "What happened?" She sniffled, avoiding my eyes. Tommy said it was my fault that Daddy left, that if I'd been a better kid, he wouldn't have gone away. I felt a surge of anger, both at this Tommy kid and at the situation that had put my daughter in this position. "Emily, look at me," I said gently. When she did, I continued, "What happened between me and your dad is not your fault. It's not Ethan's fault. It's grown-up stuff that has nothing to do with how amazing you both are. Okay?" She nodded, wiping her eyes. "I know. That's why I pushed Tommy. I told him he didn't know anything about our family." I sighed, torn between pride at her standing up for herself and concern about the fighting. "I understand why you did that, but we can't solve problems by pushing people, okay? We'll talk more about this at home." After a meeting with the principal and Tommy's parents, we headed home. As I tucked Emily into bed that night, she asked in a small voice, "Mommy, are you and Daddy ever going to get back together?" My heart ached. "No, sweetie. Daddy and I, we care about each other, and we both love you and Ethan very much, but we're not going to be married anymore. Sometimes. That's just how things work out." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "Okay, as long as you're happy, Mommy. You seem happier now." I blinked back tears, amazed at my daughter's perception. "I am happier, sweetie, and you know what? It's because I have you and Ethan. You two make me happier than anything in the world." The next day, I had a meeting scheduled with Rachel, my lawyer. As I walked into her office, she greeted me with a smile. "Sarah, good news. We've reached a settlement agreement with Mark's team." I sat down, my heart racing. "Really? That's great. What are the terms?" Rachel laid out the details. The house would be mine, along with primary custody of the kids. Mark would have visitation rights and pay child support. We'd split our savings and retirement accounts equally. "It's a fair deal," Rachel said. "Better than fair, actually. Mark's guilt is working in our favor." I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. This was it, the official end of my marriage. "When do we sign?" I asked. "We can do it right now if you're ready," Rachel said, pulling out a stack of papers. I took a deep breath. Was I ready? As I thought about it, I realized that yes, I was. I was ready to close this chapter of my life and start a new one. With a steady hand, I signed the papers. It was done. I was divorced. As I left Rachel's office, I felt lighter somehow, like I'd put down a heavy burden I'd been carrying for months. On impulse, I decided to treat myself to lunch at my favorite cafe. As I sat there enjoying my sandwich and people watching, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Lisa. "How'd it go with the lawyer?" I smiled, typing back, "It's done. I'm officially divorced." Her response came quickly. "How are you feeling?" I paused, really thinking about it. How did I feel? Sad, yes. The end of a marriage. I've been one tainted by betrayal was always sad. But underneath that, I felt hopeful, excited even. "I feel good," I replied, ready for whatever comes next. As if on cue, my phone rang. It was the hospital. One of the nurses had called in sick, and they needed someone to cover a shift. In the past, I might have hesitated, worried about childcare and Mark's schedule. But now now I had a support system in place. I had my life organized in a way that worked for me and the kids. "I'll be there in 30 minutes, I said confidently. That night, after my shift, I came home to find Emily and Ethan waiting up for me. They'd made dinner. Well, they'd heated up pizza, but it's the thought that counts, and were eager to tell me about their day. As we sat around the kitchen table, laughing and talking, I felt a wave of contentment wash over me. This was my life now. Different from what I'd imagined. Sure, but beautiful in its own way. Later, as I got ready for bed, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. The woman looking back at me wasn't the same one who had discovered her husband's betrayal all those months ago. This woman was stronger, more confident, more me. I thought back to that day in the hotel parking lot, when I'd felt like my world was ending. If I could go back and talk to that Sarah, I'd tell her that yes, it was going to be hard. Yes, there would be days when she'd want to give up. But I'd also tell her that she was stronger than she knew, that she would not just survive this, but thrive. As I climbed into bed, I felt at peace for the first time in a long time. Tomorrow was a new day, the first day of my new life, and I was ready for it, ready for whatever challenges it might bring, whatever joys it might hold, because I knew now, without a doubt, that I could handle anything life threw my way. I was Sarah Thompson, single mom, nurse, survivor, and my story was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning.